Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now, today I really want to talk to you about a movie which I picked up on DVD a couple of weeks ago, The Flight of the Navigator. This is a film from 1986 and was so important to me, is so important to me, not only as a child but also actually now as a grown-up. But ironically, I wouldn't necessarily immediately ever put it in my top childhood movies, if you see what I mean. It'd be somewhere in my top 20, certainly my top 15 or 20. But, you know, my top 5 would include movies like the original animated Transformers, Hook, Labyrinth, the Star Wars movies, these kind of things. These are films which are my childhood favourites, ones which I return to all the time. But The Flight of the Navigator is one which was actually in my top 3 as a child in terms of how often we would circulate certain videos in our VCR at home when we were watching movies. It was always being watched, but I completely forgot about it. When I was about 10 or 11, we just stopped watching this film, and I forgot the name of it. I carried on remembering though scenes and characters and moments and images from the film. And it was only, like I say, a few weeks ago in a conversation that the name came back to me, and the name was reintroduced to me, and I was able to actually pick up the movie. So it's one of those weird things, but I don't think I can call it a favourite, even though it is a favourite. But I cannot deny how important this movie is to me, and to a certain extent to me and my brother as well. So The Flight of the Navigator, broadly speaking, is about a young boy who's about 12 years old called David Freeman, and he is essentially kidnapped. He's taken by a spaceship to be examined. He's studied. I don't think he's probed though, hopefully not, and then he's returned to Earth. But unbeknownst to him, it's 8 years later. 8 years have passed, even though he's exactly the same age. For him, not a moment has passed, maybe a couple of hours, that's about it. And the whole world has changed, and therefore it's a very scary, freaky film, especially as a child, because that's one of your worst nightmares, is to return home and have other people living in your house and not know where your parents are and where's your brother and what's happening. That is terrifying and therefore brilliant. It's like Roald Dahl, it's like the Brothers Grimm. It goes right to the heart of what scares you as a child, and therefore it grips you, gets your attention. And really today I want to talk about 3 main things in this movie which are very important to me, and which actually I really responded to and respond to now. I've tried to record this several times now, and every single time I just ramble on and it just goes nowhere. So 3 things, and then maybe I'll put things at the end as well if we've got time. But very quickly, obviously I've just got back from a holiday. We just spent a week away in a cottage. The weather was terrible, but that meant actually that we were trapped in the cottage for a week. It was fantastic, really nice, very relaxing. And the really interesting thing is we actually watched this film there on this huge TV, 50-inch screen. I mean, holiday cottages have really gone up in the world. That's bigger than our TV here, almost twice the size. And not only did we watch this movie, and I introduced it to my wife, and she loves it now as well, but also I just wanted to mention, we took our Dreamcast with us, and I was playing Shenmue on this massive screen, and it holds up really well, really, really well. It's a bit of an aside really, but also Sega Bass Fishing, we were playing that as well. It looks great, so if you ever get a chance, try a Dreamcast on a large screen. Anyway, I'm just reminded of that because we watched this while we were away. So today, 3 things that I want to talk about. So the first one is, and I've already sort of touched on it, is David and actually his brother Jeff Freeman. And David and Jeff, the reason why I love those characters is because, first of all, they're very real brothers. They bicker, and there's a moment in this film where they're sort of trading insults, shouting them back and forth, and it's in the way that only brothers do, only brothers really can. And there's an insult which they use, which is scuzz bucket. He goes, "Scuzz bucket!
Give me that! Weasel, dark, butt-faced scuzz bucket! You'll never see your 9th birthday, I promise!"
And this particular insult is one actually that me and my brother both use. We still use it now, in fact. And this must be where we got it from. I only realised this a couple of weeks ago when I rewatched this movie. So immediately I was thinking, yeah, wow, this is totally, I completely remember this. This is part of me, essentially. It's really, really cool. But it's also a really realistic portrayal of brothers, and I really related to David, the protagonist in this movie, because he was an older brother, and because he was a bit inquisitive, a little bit cynical, and a bit old for his age, as it were. And that's kind of how I was. Even though I was 6 when I was watching it, I was much closer to his brother's age. In the movie, his brother's 8, and he's 12 at the beginning. But I really related to David, and therefore the feels were strong with this movie when I watched it as a child, because I was on the journey with him. The moment when he returns to the house, and then being in the police station, hearing people say that he's meant to be dead, so freaky, so scary, and the way it's portrayed in the movie is spot on. But it goes right to the heart of what makes these movies, or rather makes a movie for children great, as if it's a little bit scary. For example, Labyrinth does that so well as well. If the puppets and the background and the world that they're in are a little bit freaky, it just hooks you, it just grips you, and you can't forget about it. And this story really did that for me. Now, not only do they have this bickering relationship, but actually when David has returned, and his brother, now 8 years later in 1986, he was kidnapped in 1978, his brother's now 16 and David's 12, so his brother's overtaken him. His younger brother is now the big brother, and he really steps up, he fills those shoes. And watching it as an adult, I spotted that he's there when David's in hospital. He's there reading a book about brain damage and brain illnesses, trying to understand what might have happened to his brother. And it's such a good portrayal of brothers. They're really there for each other. And actually, towards the end of the movie, Jeff steps up even more. He becomes a bit of a hero, in a small way, as a 16-year-old can, by setting up a signal. I won't spoil it too much, but setting up a signal despite the FBI being around and NASA and all this kind of thing. So, first of all, the portrayal of the brothers and David as protagonist is amazing. It just stuck with me and is so important to me, and indeed, as I say, to my brother as well. Now, this movie is set in the 80s, and boy, can you tell. The fashion, the references, the pop music, the music videos, the hair colours, everything about this film is massive 80s, and so it's great watching it now for the nostalgia factor. But something which is, I suppose, of that time is actually the other protagonist, I guess, and that is the spaceship. This spaceship is a beautiful design, and it's accompanied by this ethereal music, and I'll come back to the music at the end, but the music is perfect, the themes surrounding this spaceship. It's a seamless, sort of almost like a walnut design to this spaceship, and only David can really gain access, and eventually David gets into the ship, and this sort of relationship builds between him and the AI which is running the ship. He's a Trimaxian drone ship, so David decides to call him Max, and Max, through I suppose the second and third act of this movie, goes on a sort of a character arc where he basically develops a character. He goes from being a very sort of like, you will give me the map kind of thing, very robotic, to actually having because of having a childlike personality. But this is because he's actually trying to take the maps from David's mind, which he planted in David's brain, to try and get home. But he ends up sort of pulling some of David's personality out with it. It's just superb. The fact that you have this moment where the NASA guys are surrounding the ship. David's just got inside, and David just says, "Just get us out of here. Just take us away. 20 miles away. Go." And the spaceship goes straight up, as it would, because it's a spaceship. It wants to go into space. And David's like, no, I meant 20 miles away. So the spaceship rushes back down again, and then goes 20 miles in the other direction. It's perfect, and it's imaginative, but also makes perfect sense. And that's the best kind of, I suppose, real world fantasy fiction, as it were, or this blend of sort of it's set in a real-ish world, but this sort of sci-fi. The best way to do it for children is if it has these amazing ideas. The idea 20 miles away could be 20 miles straight up. That for me, especially as a child, was really cool. It was like, 20 miles could be that way. It doesn't have to be over there. It could be in almost any direction. It's a strange thing to pick up on, but it really made an impression on me as a child. Now this movie really plays with the fact that Max will be turning up at some point, right from the first shot. There's this spaceship, sort of silver thing flying in a clear blue sky, which actually turns out to be a frisbee. And then there's an air blimp, which everyone stops and looks up at, and you go, oh, is this the spaceship? But obviously not, no, it's a blimp that's going overhead. And then even as actually David is walking through the forest, he sees something through the trees, and it's a water tower. But the filmmakers are really playing with the fact that you're expecting this. You're waiting for the ship, and the ship does not disappoint. When the spaceship turns up, Max really does actually deliver. As I say, he starts off as a slightly robotic sort of character, and things like, for example, when David needs to go to the loo, he thinks that David is leaking. You're leaking, kind of sort of thing. Why are you leaking over there? But eventually he ends up, because he takes on some of the boy's personality, using phrases like "excuse me," very Zelda sort of cartoon reference there, going to Tokyo, getting directions muddled up instead of going to Florida, I think, which is where they're heading to. It's so charming, and actually, because as a child when you're watching it, the ship is becoming a little bit more like you relate to the ship even more. I didn't for a moment find the spaceship scary or sterile or unnerving, even though it had the potential to. The design isn't that far off something that you might find in an Alien movie, if you see what I mean. It's sort of got elements of the Nostromo, elements of Geiger, but actually they manage it so well without skimping on the design. They manage to make the ship approachable and characterful, so that actually you can watch it as a child and obviously enjoy it as an adult, which I clearly did. Now the third and final thing I want to talk about is actually the creatures in this movie. Max has been going around collecting creatures from the known universe to study them back on Phalon, a planet where he's from, and these creatures are fascinating. One of them, which always fascinated me, was this eyeball.
What's in here?
Exactly. How could that not make an impression on you as a child? There was this slug type creature, which apparently was a very nasty creature, and it had a cold, and it just looked like the embodiment of a cold with its sort of mucousy, sort of undulating body. But the best thing of all was the Pukmarin, the old Pukmarin, this amazing, beautiful little fruit bat-like creature, the cutest thing ever, who was actually an orphan. Sadly, his planet has been blown up in the time that he's been away, and how could you not love this guy? And I was so pleased as a child to see that David actually got to keep him as a pet at the end, because after all he's got nowhere else to go. So at the end, the Pukmarin sort of peeks out of David's bag, and Jeff, younger Jeff, when David does eventually make it back to the past, younger Jeff is amazed to see this thing as well, as I was as a 6-year-old. So those are the three things: the brothers, especially David as a protagonist, the ship, Max, and also the creatures. I'll try and wrap this up as quickly as possible, but there's a couple of other things I'd really like to talk about, and that is, I'd say the music is spot on. It's like a combination of E.T. and the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's perfectly pitched for this film. A little bit scary, a little bit ethereal, a little bit, ooh, what's that over there? But always perfect for the scene. There's this robot in the movie called Ralph at the NASA base. Keep an eye out for him. The robotic assistant labour facilitator, I do believe, and he's actually looked after by Sarah Jessica Parker, a young version of her, who she does a quite good job actually. In terms of, that must have been one of her first proper big movie roles. She's a convincing 80s teenager, or young 20s type person. So spot on there. In the NASA base, actually the portrayal of NASA is really good, again very E.T.-like, but in the NASA base, I remember in particular, on the bed, David is sort of given this room to stay in while they do tests on his brain, and on the bed, there is a Transformer toy in particular, I do believe, and I always remember seeing that thing and going, I want that! Why don't I get tested on by NASA? It's a strange thing to remember, but I do distinctly remember that, yes. Anyway, I don't want to talk about this for too long, because frankly, we've all got better things to do. But if you haven't seen this film yet, definitely give it a go. It's a great slice of 80s nostalgia. It's a wonderful story for children and for adults. And it's a film which has been so important for how I I suppose, how I approached so many things. It's kind of weird to look back and think, oh yeah, that's where I got that idea from, or that's why forests felt like that to me as a child, or that's why why I remember that spaceship in that way at that time. It's always been there, and I just wanted to talk about how great this movie is. So if you haven't tried it yet, give it a go. It's certainly in my adult top 20 children's films, and probably in my top 3 most important films in terms of having an effect on, in particular, how I saw my younger brother and the potential of brotherhood. Absolutely. So definitely give this movie a go. If you can, pick it up and have a watch and see what you think, because it delivers. It's a great film, and a little slight hidden gem from the mid-80s. Anyway guys, I've talked for long enough on this. Whatever you're getting up to, whatever you have been getting up to in the past week, hopefully you've been having a great time, and as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.